morning, Paula. Nice to be with you.
And you've said this levy is purely political. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that there were at least two other choices the government could have made in funding the reconstruction effort in southern Queensland. The first is that they could have simply borrowed the $1.8 billion that the levy is expected to raise, and although that would have resulted in a bigger budget deficit in the 2011-12 financial year, which is when most of the levy revenue is going to be collected, the government was in any case forecasting a budget deficit of about $12 billion for that financial year, and because most of the money will be collected in 11-12, the failure to have imposed it wouldn't have affected the prospect of achieving a $3 billion budget surplus by 2012-13, which the government seems particularly attached to as one of its key economic management credentials. I don't think borrowing an additional $1.8 billion, which, although it's a large amount of money for any individual or small business, is 0.12% of Australia's national income, would have made a tap of difference to the judgments the Reserve Bank would be making at that time about the appropriate level of interest rates. The alternative, which the government could have made, is to have funded all of the reconstruction and rebuilding costs from cuts in other areas of government spending rather than simply two-thirds of it. Now, you mentioned some suggestions that your listeners have made as to where government spending could be cut. I don't necessarily agree with those, but I could suggest other areas such as, for example, the First Home Owners Grant for purchases of established dwellings, a grant which does nothing to increase the supply of housing, but which does serve to push up the price of established dwellings and thus actually make them less affordable for other buyers rather than more affordable. Or the government could have means-tested any of the still quite large number of unmeans-tested welfare benefits that are out there, or it could have hacked into some of what, when they were in opposition, leading figures in the present government described as wasteful and extravagant spending by the Howard government. But they chose not to do either of those things. They chose to impose a temporary tax increase on about 40% of Australian taxpayers. Now, that doesn't mean to say it's wrong. What I'm saying is, however, that it was a political choice by the government as to how part of the reconstruction effort should be funded. It wasn't something they had to do out of economic necessity, as the Prime Minister has been saying.
And Saul, if I can put a local question to you, because there is a lot of anger around today because some of the spending cuts have come from roads projects in this region. Why do you think the government decided to cut road spending? Or not cut road spending, that is wrong. Defer road spending projects, spending on road projects.
The answer I heard the Prime Minister giving to that question yesterday was that there simply isn't sufficient skilled labour to undertake those road projects, other infrastructure projects elsewhere in the country, and rebuild the infrastructure that was damaged by the floods all at the same time, and that any attempt by the government to do all those things at once, given that much skilled labour is being employed in the mining industry now, that is skills of the same sort that would be required for road building and the like, that would put upward pressure on labour costs and potentially generate inflationary pressures in the road building construction sector. Now, the government has agreed to speed up temporary visas for people who have those skills, and has also provided assistance for unemployed people in the southern states to move up to Queensland, where there will undoubtedly be work for them on some of these projects. I'm not in a position to argue that the government is wrong in making that judgment. They probably are right. We know there are shortages of engineers and skills trades people who work on projects like that, so that was probably a spending cut that they had to make. Many of the other spending cuts which the government announced yesterday were ones which they should have been making anyway. As the Prime Minister herself said, if you're going to have a carbon price, which she believes that we should, and I agree with her about that, then you don't need this plethora of other climate change initiatives which the government decided to act yesterday. So why they had to wait until southern Queensland was under several feet of water to announce those spending cuts is, again, I think, a question of political choices rather than one of economic imperatives.
Saul Eastlake, we've got about a minute to the news at 9 o'clock. I just wanted to ask you briefly what you think will happen to the economy as a result of what's been of this levy.
Very little at all. Indeed, the Prime Minister said that the levy was calibrated in such a way as to minimise the adverse impact on consumer spending and hence on retailers. I think he's probably right about that, but to the extent that it's true, of course, if there's no impact on retail spending and on the economy, then there can't be any impact on interest rates either from it or from the failure to impose it either.
Saul Eastlake, thank you very much for your opinions this morning.
Thanks for having me, Paula.